So, Bob, you are the film editor of the highly anticipated Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Needless to say, this is a beloved series of movies. What was your level of anticipation like going into it?
Do you mean like how excited was I to work on the movie?
Oh, sure. Well, excited, intimidated. I mean, I believe this is your first
I,
Star Wars outing, so.
I would say, no, it is. I would say incredibly excited. I wouldn't say intimidated because I was so happy to be doing it. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because it means so much to people, and the films are expensive and highly thought of, and so there's a certain amount of pressure in delivering. But I have to say, the whole way we approached making the movie was just trying to make a really great movie. So many of the things that you would deal with on any film, we dealt with on this film. But I mean, again, I don't mean to suggest at all that we weren't aware every single day that we were making a Star Wars movie, and everyone in my crew, are huge fans, and it was just an honor to work on it, and it was amazing to do.
The movie is incredibly ambitious in its storytelling. You have multiple protagonists and multiple storylines that are all weaving in and out and kind of coalescing into one. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, basically how you juggled all those balls in the air without making it narratively confusing?
Well, it was one of the great challenges of the film, but I would start with saying that Rian's screenplay was pretty great, and that gets you a long way there, because many of the complications of juggling the multiple storylines and characters were solved in the screenplay. But that doesn't mean, I mean, really, when you make a movie, there's a screenplay, and then there's the movie you shoot, and then there's the movie you edit and finish, and all three of those things are always different, and it's to varying degrees. I would say in some ways this film is different than where we started, but the template was there, and so it really, a lot of the problems were solved by Rian early on, and frankly I had a similar experience on Looper. I mean, Looper is a very complicated movie, in some ways even more complicated than that, and yet it was a similar sort of situation where the screenplay solved a lot of those problems. But that said, one of the things that we would have to do when we would run into problems is and this is a very common editorial thing, we have this big board that has all the little cards with every scene on it, and you stand in front of that board, and you spend a lot of time standing in front of that board trying to figure out, if I move this to here and I cut this in half and we separated this like this and we stopped here, you spend a lot of time working things out like that, and then once you feel like I've got something there, then you go and you execute it. And we did a lot of that. Many of these things are small, like where do you end the scene, or what happens if we broke this scene in half, but it is a complication of a movie like this.
And add into that these really spectacular action sequences. Again, with all these multiple characters kind of going in and out, and there's all sorts of things happening in the climax of the movie. Can you talk a bit about executing, putting together those action sequences? How involved are you in the planning of the shooting, and then I mean, what goes into putting them together?
Well, I mean, it depends to some degree on a sequence by sequence basis, because the amount of things that have to change and that I influence varies. But there is a great deal of involvement. One of the first things that happens when on a movie like this, have you seen the film?
Oh yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens, the opening space battle sequence, which is extremely, it's long and complicated, is that sequence gets worked out as previs, which is sort of a cartoon version of the scene where you sort of figure out how the camera is going to work, and it's a basic conceptualization of the scene. And when I start a movie, and this movie was no different, I get this sequence. And if you were to watch it, it looks like a cartoon version of the movie without the actors and somebody else playing saying the lines and everything. And the very first thing that I do is I go and I'll start making changes on that and figuring out things that, from my perspective, my point of view, could be better. Whether it's we need a close up here, we need to do this. And so even in that stage, where you're not even necessarily shooting the sequence, you start making changes like that. Then they start shooting the sequence, and a sequence like that was shot over a period of weeks. you start filling those things in, and as the sequence evolves, you learn more about how the sequence works, and things that you thought might work wouldn't work. And on a movie like this, there's a lot of time and resources. So one of the things that would happen is, Ryan's coming to the cutting room, I'm doing my thing, and we realize, oh yeah, you know what we need to do? We need to change the way this works here. So we're going to either shoot this thing, or we're going to reshoot this thing that we already shot. So it becomes this this sort of interactive thing between editorial and production. And then you get into post-production, or actually even when we're still shooting, we start turning things over to visual effects, in this case, Industrial Light and Magic. And then they start giving us things, and that becomes both iterative and interactive, because we get a shot in and we go, oh, you know what really needs to happen? That his X-Wing needs to bank further to the left than this. And so it becomes this unbelievably long, iterative, interactive process for, with all of the players. And it takes a long time in a sequence like that for it all to come together. So anyway, of course, that's basically how it works. It's quite complex.
Right, and I mean, added to that, you're dealing with very extensive special effects. Can you talk a bit about how that affects your work?
Well, yeah, I mean, as much as in movies like this, I mean, just to take the most basic example, if there's a digital creature, when they shoot it, that creature's not there. There might be some type of stand-in for it. There might be somebody with a pole and a ball on it that's for eye line, right? And so you're putting it together, and a character that's in the movie is not actually there, right? And so that really complicates the process, because how long you stay on something, how something feels, is often determined by how people behave and their eyes and everything. And if you don't have that, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But over time and with experience, you get better at it. And also, it kind of goes back to that iterative process, because so we'll turn over a plate, say that which is just the live action element, and the creature, say, is not in there. So that material will come back in a very crude form from ILM that says this is basically how it blocks out. And then you'll put it in the movie, and you'll go, oh, what I really need to do here is this or that, or I need to add a close-up here. And again, it's iterative and interactive. And this goes on, I mean, I was on the movie for 19 months. Wow. And so from the time of shooting to the time the movie is finished, and that iterative process is happening that entire time. And the complex sequences, I mean, they'll take that long. They'll take almost the entire length of the movie to actually get them right and finished.
I'm reminded of a story of when, excuse me, George Lucas showed the original Star Wars in a rough cut to his filmmaking friends, and it had none of the special effects in it. And they said, "What are we looking at here?"
Exactly right, because as you know, I mean, quite famously, the TIE Fighter X-wing battles, they repurposed footage from World War II air battles. And by the way, these sort of things still, I mean, not really on this movie, because there's not so much that's relevant, but it does happen on films where we call them ripomatics. We'll go get stuff from other movies or some other source that kind of represents what we want, and we'll put it in there because it's a really quick shorthand how to solve something like that. But yes, that's a very famous example, and I would like to have seen that version of the movie. I'm sure it's actually quite wonderful.
We can only imagine. One of the interesting qualities about this movie is how deeply it delves into character, much more so than movies like this are expected to. Can you talk about, I guess, going deeper into the characters in this movie and balancing out the peaks and the valleys of the structure?
Well, I mean, you raise a good point, and here's the thing that's really interesting. So this is this big extravaganza. It has all these visual effects and all these characters and everything. But the bottom line with every movie is character and story. And in my opinion, character is paramount. This is not some great revelation, but it's something that we focused very, very, very much on, both in Ryan in the screenplay and how the movie was directed, and certainly in post-production, because we would always be asking, what can we do to make this character even better? And there's a lot of things that happen over the course of both shooting and cutting the movie. We may say, we should pick up a close-up here that's going to help this moment. It's going to make us understand how this character feels more than we do right now. And what's important is to focus on those things. And it's something that we couldn't have put more effort into, because if you like the characters, you're going to go along with the ride. And I think the movie accomplishes that extremely well. And it really is just as simple as saying, this is what we mainly focus on. And by the way, it also has to do with visual effects, because one of the things that we talk about in all the visual effects is what is the story of this shot? And then how does character fit into that shot? Because and if you think about all the great action sequences that have ever been done in movies, all of the truly great ones come out of character. And so our focus from tops to tails in the movie is, how do we make these characters the best characters they can possibly be, whether they're in an X-Wing, a TIE fighter, or they're just in a dramatic scene. And it's really about focus.
Working with Rian Johnson, what is that collaboration like?
Well, he's fantastic because he is sort of endlessly brilliant and imaginative, and he's a great storyteller. And those things that I was just talking about, we're very, very simpatico on, which is the focus is always on the story and the characters. Because the thing is, the movie, just from an editorial standpoint, is very classically edited, meaning we cut to things when we need to. We don't cut just for energy. And I'm not even saying that that's necessarily a bad notion doing that, but if you keep it pure and you're really, really paying attention to what's important, it tends to be simpler, and the simpler version of it, if you can manage it. And Rian is so great about that, and also he knows a tremendous about editing. So because of that, I mean, really, it's as good as a collaboration as you could possibly have.
Before you go, I wanted to ask, it was recently announced that Mr. Johnson is going to be doing 3 more of these Star Wars movies, independent of this trilogy. Since you are a collaborator of his, are you going to return for that new trilogy?
I have no doubt. I mean, really, this movie was the adventure of a lifetime. You know, you started by asking me, like, what was it like to come on here? I still can't believe that we got to do this, and the idea that we would get to go do it again is absolutely extraordinary, and I couldn't possibly wait. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what it turns out to be.
I think everyone in the world is looking forward to seeing what it will turn out to be, as they're looking forward to seeing this movie. Bob, thank you so much. Congratulations, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Yep.
Thank you.